You think you know history? What if I told you Napoleon wasn't short, Vikings never wore horned helmets, and the pyramids weren't built by slaves? Get ready, because we're about to debunk 10 of the biggest myths you were probably taught in school. Let's start with one of the most famous figures in history, Napoleon Bonaparte. The image we have is of a tiny, angry man, right? The Napoleon complex. But the truth is, he was about 5 feet 7 inches tall, which was actually average, or even slightly above average, for a Frenchman of his time. So where did the myth come from? Mostly British propaganda. They used his height as a way to mock and belittle their greatest enemy. The confusion was also fueled by the difference between the French inch and the British inch. So no, Napoleon wasn't short. His enemies just had a very effective PR team. Next up, let's sail over to the Vikings. Picture them in your head. I bet you see big burly guys with horned helmets, right? Well, scrap that image. There is zero archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore horned helmets into battle. Can you imagine how impractical that would be? Your helmet getting caught on a tree branch or an opponent's shield. The horned helmet image was actually popularized in the 19th century, particularly in a German opera by Richard Wagner. The real Viking helmets were much more practical, usually simple conical or rounded caps made of iron or leather. They were fearsome warriors, no doubt, but without the horns. Let's travel to ancient Egypt and the magnificent pyramids. The popular story, often shown in movies, is that they were built by thousands of slaves toiling under the crack of a whip. Recent archaeological discoveries, however, paint a very different picture. Excavations of tombs near the pyramids revealed that the builders were skilled, paid laborers. They were well fed. Evidence shows they ate plenty of meat and were even given proper burials with honor. They were respected members of society, not slaves. Building the pyramids was a national project, a form of civil service and a great source of pride. Now let's jump to the American Wild West. You've seen the movies. A dusty town, a clock tower ticking towards noon, and 2 cowboys facing off in a high noon duel. It's dramatic, it's iconic, but it's mostly fiction. While gunfights certainly happened, these formalized quick-draw duels in the middle of Main Street were incredibly rare. Most shootouts were chaotic, messy ambushes or drunken brawls. Many Western towns actually had strict gun control laws, requiring visitors to check their firearms at the sheriff's office. The whole high noon trope was largely invented by dime novels and later Hollywood because it made for a much better story. Think about the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, right? A time of complete stagnation, ignorance and filth between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance. This is a massive oversimplification. While life was certainly tough, this period saw incredible innovations. Think of the invention of the heavy plow, the water wheel, magnificent Gothic cathedrals, and the founding of the first universities in Europe. The term Dark Ages was coined by later Renaissance scholars who wanted to emphasize how much more enlightened their own era was. It was basically a historical branding campaign that stuck. Speaking of medieval times, what about chastity belts? These terrifying metal contraptions were supposedly locked onto women by their husbands or fathers to ensure their fidelity. Sounds horrifying, right? Well, you can relax, because there's almost no credible evidence that they were ever used during the Middle Ages. Most chastity belts you see in museums are actually from the 18th or 19th centuries and were likely created as curiosities or jokes. The idea was more of a symbolic myth about medieval cruelty than a widespread reality. Let's talk about Christopher Columbus. The story goes he sailed the ocean blue in 1492 to prove the Earth was round, while everyone else thought it was flat. This is completely false. Educated people in Europe had known the Earth was a sphere since the time of the ancient Greeks. The real debate Columbus had with the Spanish court wasn't about the shape of the Earth, but its size. Columbus drastically underestimated the Earth's circumference, which is why he thought he could reach Asia by sailing west. He didn't prove the world was round, he just got his math wrong and accidentally bumped into a continent that was in his way. Here's one you've definitely heard. Albert Einstein failed math in school. It's often used as a comforting story to tell struggling students, see, even Einstein had trouble. But it's not true. Einstein was a mathematical prodigy from a very young age. He mastered differential and integral calculus before he was 15. The myth comes from a misunderstanding of the school grading system in Germany at the time. When he was 16, the system was reversed, so a 1 became the highest grade and a 6 the lowest. Looking at his old report card, people saw the lower numbers from his later years and assumed he was failing, when in fact, he was acing his classes. Let's talk about witches in Salem. The images of women being burned at the stake. This is a common confusion between the American and European witch trials. In Europe, burning at the stake was a common method of execution for heresy. However, in the Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts, not a single person was burned at the stake. Of the 20 people executed, 19 were hanged, and one man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death with heavy stones. It's a gruesome detail, but it's important to get the history right. The image of burning is powerful, but it's not what happened in Salem. Finally, let's hear those famous words from Marie Antoinette: "Let them eat cake." When told that the French peasants had no bread, the out-of-touch queen supposedly retorted with this callous phrase. It perfectly captured the disconnect between the monarchy and the people. The only problem? She never said it. The phrase actually appeared in the writings of the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau years before the Revolution, and he attributed it to a great princess, but not Marie Antoinette. The line was later pinned on her by revolutionary propagandists to stoke public anger. She became a scapegoat for problems that had been brewing for decades. So there you have it. 10 massive historical myths busted. From Napoleon's height to Viking helmets and Einstein's grades, the history we think we know is often more fiction than fact. It just goes to show that you should always question the stories you're told, even the ones in history books. History is so much more complex and fascinating than the simple myths we learn. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed digging into the real story behind these myths, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments, which of these myths surprised you the most? See you in the next video.